I want to believe that you were asking questions. What kind of answer were given
I,
to you?
I didn't have to ask questions because the stories were being told. We gave oral history of our family life. And so in the early 80s, there was a program called Roots and Eyes on the Prize. And so many of my family members marched with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Others were with Malcolm X and other different movements for Black liberation and so solidarity and the Brown movement that occurred here in the United States of America. So they told stories about making sure we knew who we were, that we understood, and we had a analysis of power, a power analysis of how the world operated, and why it exists, why this it exists in the way that it does. Early on, we scarcity wasn't something that we believed in as a family. We were told we're your children from the sun, and abundance is your birthright. Not many people hear that growing up. So we knew that the opportunity was available. We knew that we had to work twice as hard as our counterparts in order to be even considered to be good enough. So that was a part of the conversation we had within our family context about ensuring that we sought opportunity. And we knew that those who owned, right? When I grew up in Boston, ownership for housing didn't occur, right? I ended up working for Community Coalition, CRA investment, Community and Reinvestment Act. And it wasn't until the 1990s that banks decided to open up lending institutions in predominantly Black and Latino neighborhoods that they considered to be worthy of credit. When you had years upon years, decades of codified law where you had resettlement acts and redlining that was in law by banks and by the federal government that disallowed and disadvantaged, I should say, really disadvantaged people of color from owning property. And so there included the wealth gap. And the same thing happens in across Africa, but differently. So there's a wealth gap when you look at, Afrikaners and Afrikaans, right? Native people from African and Afrikaners, the settlers, who gets to own. So you may have a house that's passed down in family land, but you don't own your manufacturing rights, right? You import, and that importation comes from your colonial nation, right? That governs your land. And so the opportunities you see quite clearly are advantageous to others and disadvantaged to you, and the limitations that society allows you to think of yourself as is embedded in the way in your instruction, your education, and who you see to fulfill those roles.
Thank you also for that, because that you are touching arguments that are really very important. I wish we could have the all the time, because each of them deserve their treatment, no? Because when we look at how Africans in the United States, for example, African American in this case, the way they are treated, sometimes one person might think, okay, maybe Africans are free. But the point is that no, we are not free. Those in Africa are not free. We suffer exactly the same thing, like I was saying before. All of us are suffering from the same crime, the crime of being an African. So
So,
the liberty also, in fact, the reason that the perpetration of the injustice against the African American and African in other part of the world continue is because there is no country in Africa that can stand up, which means that because if there were any free country in Africa, they will stand up, of course, then bear the cost. It's like maybe some people coming from Africa to imprison the Italians. If the Italians do not have the power, Germany will rise up, Spain will rise up, France will rise up in their defense. But in the case of Africa, when we had become the prisoner of war, like I usually say, we don't yet have any country that can stand up and say, oh, leave them alone. If you don't, you are going to have these consequences. So for this reason, we are all suffering the same thing. We are just brothers in this suffering, sisters in this suffering. But anyway, We
I
are
think there's
gradually
some
constructing a way
opportunities.
to get out of these chains. Yes, say something, please.
I think there's some opportunities about how we are structuring the African Union. For good or bad, Gaddafi was doing work, and he was doing economic development work in order to create one currency. Before, if you know any Libyans before we invaded Libya, you would know that most Libyans didn't have their,
Exporting democracy, right?
whether it's right or wrong, I'm not here to make judgments on that, but I'm going to look at the comparison between being Black in America, being Black in the UK and Europe, and Libya. You could, if you were a Libyan, if you wanted to study abroad, whether it happened fairly or not, most people could study abroad and their finances would be paid for. We don't have that opportunity. You had housing allowances. You have a child and you received an allowance. You're you look at the UAE, if you move across and you look at the opportunities where their oil reserves are going to support their development, and all their people have a standard of living, right? A basic standard of living. And I think that that was something for us to look at. And I think that when we were looking at when France was having conversations with its, with the nations that it used to oversee in Africa, they were looking at getting rid of their CEPHA, they were looking to undo that harm. Like, why should African nations take their resources and bank, right, in French owned banks, and then you receive a loan on your own money, and you have to make justifications for. I've never seen a gold mine in France, but I can go to Sierra Leone and stand on a mountain and tell you that there's gold in there. And how do we start to develop those resources for ourselves, for Africans to use? And that's the work of the International Institute of Family Development, is that there's our society as Africans, as indigenous people, cannot continue to stand if we do not strengthen ourselves as a family as in, mother, father, multiple wives and father, however that family structure fits for nation building and creating opportunities that the diaspora can play a pivotal role in coming back and supporting that development. We spend a lot of time on foreign direct investments from other nations. And other nations are coming in and doing their work, but most of that is imported work. And if you are building a train, if you're building a train line in Zimbabwe or in Zambia, the workers of that train line, the consultants that come in, are coming in from the country of which, and the resources and the development is happening in the host country. We would love, the International Institute would love to be able, we have oranges. I'm just going to give a couple of examples. We have oranges that grow, right, and throughout Africa. I cannot find in West Africa an orange, a full-fledged, a modern orange juice manufacturing facility. What we do is we sell in raw, in bulk, at a detriment to ourselves, and then we import that juice that is refined. We do the same thing with peanut. When I go to the stores to find peanut butter or peanut oil, wherever I'm in West Africa, I look at, this was produced where, and this is manufactured where, but the peanuts came from, I have tons of clients who are saying, can you help us move our trucks and move our peanuts out of country? And when I was like, yes, I want to do a really good thing, but then I would pause and say, have we thought about ways and opportunities that we can manufacture and develop that peanut in country? And people stopped, I think, when we say we're not free because we sometimes don't think that we have the capability. I believe most strongly that Africa has some of the most brightest minds on the continent. And with the right opportunities put before us, with the right connections to our global family, I believe that we can really change the paradigm where we will become a first world country.